Greetings from Integral University. It is indeed a great honor and pleasure to welcome all the beneficiaries, participants in the International Faculty Development Program on the theme Emerging Trends in English Literature. We are proud to announce that this program is conducted along with the Association of United Nations Academic Impact. Integral University is always progressive in creating and promoting an amiable atmosphere and thereby further helps in the establishment of the spirit of national integration, secularism, and international understanding to bring all the sections of the society into the mainstream. For the overall development of India and to provide modern, scientific, moral, and literary education for social upliftment. This university always empowers the young generation with global perspective in order to bring about peace, tranquility, prosperity, and bliss to the entire world in general and to our country in particular. By keeping this thought in mind, this IFDP is designed to integrate and connect the literature of the world at one platform. To accomplish the stream of the participants and the resource persons across the globe are playing a vital role. In the vivacious discussion of literature in the contemporary scenario, literature always works as a representative of culture through the mirror of society. Culture and cultural expression, including literature and art, contains many examples of life experiences related to the migration and diaspora, and in many texts we find elaborate description, explicit and implicit, of matters and perspective about the related to the identity in all its formation and problematics. Migration and diaspora result in the problematic of assimilation and hybridity and in post colonial scholarship. In particular, attention is paid to the concepts of migration termed creolization on the ground that cultural contact, cultural transmission, and cultural transformations result in the creation of new culture. To discuss such an exploratory ideas on non-documented migrants in contemporary British literature, today we have with us our eminent guest speaker, Ma'am Elisabetta Marino. She is the Associate Professor of English Literature at the University of Rome, Tor Vergata. She is the author of four monographs, a volume of the figure of Tamerlane in British and American literature, an introduction to the British and Bangladeshi literature, a study of the relationship between Mary Shelley and Italy, an analysis of romantic drama on the mythological subjects. Between 2001 and 2002, she has co-edited 11 collections of essays. Three more are forthcoming. And a special forum of Journal of Transnational American Studies. She has just co-edited a special issue of D Journal of Post-Colonial Theory of Gender Studies. Ma'am is currently acting as a guest editor for the special issue of Journal of American Studies of Turkey, focused on Italian American material, culture, and other tasks. This task of introducing our guest of honor and speaker is a great privilege. Ma'am is a woman of virtue and simplicity. I feel elated to introduce her to everyone. Over to you, ma'am, please.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. And I'm extremely happy to be here with you. And thank you for the generous introduction. While I was thinking about a topic for today's talk, I decided to focus on probably one of the most relevant figure nowadays in British literature, the figure of the non-documented migrant. This brings me back to the value of literature, to the work of literature, to use the words of Christopher Schaberg. Because when we think of the refugee crisis and all the crises of nowadays life, the way they are broadcast in the media, the way they're featured in the newspapers and articles, there is something behind the accuracy of figures and statistics, something that literature aims at exploring. And therefore, today I will talk about the works of two writers who shared their background because their families originally came from the Indian subcontinent, namely Monica Ali and Sanjeev Sahota, who are probably two of the most prominent contemporary British writers. And they also drew from the stories which were handed down to them by their family, by their acquaintances. So they reflected using secondhand experience, firsthand experience, and their extremely high and deep capacity for observation of nowadays phenomena. In my talk, I will delve into two of their novels, namely In the Kitchen, published in 2009 by Monica Ali, and The Year of the Runaways, published in 2015 by Sanjeev Sahota. And in both these novels, the special focus and the special attention is on illegal migrants and informal workers whose uncertain and vulnerable existence has been finally exposed without oversimplification, because the problem of oversimplification is always around the corner, without biases and even distortions. In Italy, for example, the bias against non-documented migrants is extremely high. In my talk, I will employ the notion, Judith Butler's notion of precarity, and Guy Standing's idea of the precariat, which he defines as the new dangerous class. And I'm quoting now from the subtitle of his 2011 seminal treatise. And this will provide the necessary theoretical framework to better understand and analyze the two novels and their characters. But let's delve first of all into the theoretical part of my talk. In Frames of War, 2009, Butler explains the difference between two concepts which are actually intersecting concepts: the concept of precariousness and the one of precarity. Precariousness denotes a general ontological condition of fragility, which we all share, and it's inherent of our being humans, the fact that we will die. That's the only certainty in our life. And as she observes, and I'm quoting, "There is no thinking of life that is not precarious," end of quote. On the other hand, the concept of precarity is quite different. Precarity indicates, quote, "that politically induced condition in which certain populations suffer from failing social and economic networks of support and become differentially exposed to injury, violence, and death," end of quote. So this concept of precarity is therefore primarily experienced by the poor, the marginalized, the disenfranchised, and even though, as Butler has recently pointed out, it has turned into a new form of regulation that distinguishes our time, this historical time. And precarization is now also become the rule. I don't know about India. I'm pretty sure in India it's the same. But this concept of precarity in Italy has become our daily basis. Everything is precarious. Jobs are precarious. And this concept of precarity has also been glamorized in certain respects. And because it is considered as a synonym for flexibility and the fact that you can change, variety, but it's not really like that. Now, In the post-Fordist era, which has been characterized by the adoption of neoliberal models of development and marketed by extreme flexibility and aggressive competition, and high level of job insecurity, which actually aim at maximizing profits regardless of social consequences, a new class has emerged, the so-called precariat, as I mentioned before, which is a term that merges the concept of precarity with proletariat, so precariat. According to Guy Standing, migrants who are viewed by him as the light infantry of global capitalism, while forming a large share of the world's precariat, are actually in danger of becoming its primary victims, demonized and made the scapegoat of problems not of their making. This is a quotation from Standing. Especially illegal immigrants, in fact, are willing to accept any kind of job, significantly lower wages, poorer working condition, extremely dangerous also working conditions. They cannot claim any rights to health care. They're not entitled to occupational benefits. They don't know what sick pay is, maternity leave, severance pay, pension, all the benefits that we take for granted. They're not real citizens, but denizens, which is a word used in the Middle Ages to indicate permanent residents who did not have political or socio-economical rights. Or worse, they may be regarded as margisans, people who have no permanent residence status and are therefore underprivileged because marginalized. In Guy Standing's view, quote, too many interests benefit from an army of illegal migrants, and too many populists depict attempts at legalization as eroding the security of citizenry. This is obvious, that the reason why they foster this is obvious, because they can have more profit. In truth, the illegality of non-documented workers is widely exploited to the employer's advantage. They are cheap, unpretentious labor, easily blackmailed if recalcitrant, and instantly replaceable. So if one is no longer available, you can find another one with no problem whatsoever. And you can continue to exploit and blackmail this new person. Now, let's talk about the two novels now, Brick Lane. Brick Lane is the most important novel written by Monica Ali, a 2003 debut novel in which she explored the life of a British Bangladeshi community in Spitalfield, but we are not talking about that. But Brick Lane is important because somehow it has established the reputation of Monica Ali, even this novel was questioned by the Bangladeshi communities across the UK, and I will explain to you a bit before analyzing In the Kitchen, which is the novel I'm focusing on. But let's say something about Monica Ali. She was born in Dhaka in 1967, so in East Pakistan, actually. She was born of an East Pakistani father and an English mother, so she's got a mixed background. And she moved to Manchester in 1971 when the war that would lead to the independence of modern-day Bangladesh broke out. So that's the reason why she left the mother country. Since her first publication, the Oxford-educated writer has been forced to bear what has been termed the burden of representation. often placed on the shoulders of so-called minority artists who apparently are not fully qualified to cross cultural boundaries, the cultural boundaries of their own ethnic group. So their skin color operates as the dominant signifier of their identity. So she's Bangladeshi, and she has to stick to the depiction of the Bangladeshi community, which Freebie refuses to do, actually. Monica is still iconized as the trademark Brick Lane writer, despite both her later achievements and also the controversy about her dubious authenticity. Because, as I said, she's Oxford educated, she never actually lived in Banglatown, and therefore, the communities across the UK, the Bangladeshi communities across the UK, regarded her as fake, not truly representative of their life. In a 2003 interview for The Guardian, Ali herself replied to her detractors by arguing that, far from being a liability, her liminal position, because she's not fully Bangladeshi, but she's not really fully British, she's neither an insider nor an outsider to the community, granted her the extraordinary possibility to adopt more than one perspective. So, to avoid oversimplifications. And I will quote her words: standing neither behind a closed door nor in the thick of things, but rather in the shadow of the doorway is a good place from which to observe. So, shifting from the stifling environment of London's Banglatown, which is a solidly monocultural enclave, the writer's eyes actually embraced a much wider cultural horizon in the kitchen. And in order to craft our text, which is a suspenseful text, which has been variously categorized as a Bildungsroman, as a thriller-oriented story, or as a therapeutic narrative of personal transformation, Monica Ali has drawn from several scholarly sources. This is a habit of the writer. She always gathers information or reads extensively before writing. And she has then concocted her novel entitled In the Kitchen. Indeed, the plot is centered on the exploitation of illegal migrant workers and sex slaves, primarily coming from those Eastern European countries that became EU members in 2004 and 2006. In the Kitchen, therefore, reflects, as Pen Chen Liao has emphasized, quote, the most recent flow of immigrants into Britain. Moreover, the social function performed by the novel is all the more significant since the volume was composed at a time when victim-based legislations and measures had not been introduced yet, such as the UK Modern Slavery Act of 2015. The novel was released in 2009. This UK Modern Slavery Act demanded more transparency from companies operating in the UK and their commitment to eradicating modern forms of slavery from their supply chains. Let's talk about the plot of the novel, which you might not be familiar with. The novel is set in contemporary London and chronicles the progress of a white executive chef in his early 40s. This is also a reason why Monica Ali is being criticized, because she adopts the perspective of a white man in his 40s, which is far removed from her experience. His name is Gabe Lightfoot, and he passes from being thoroughly indifferent to the trials and tribulations of the numerous migrants that toil under its orders in the kitchen of the Imperial Hotel, to becoming increasingly aware of their vulnerability and aware of his own vulnerability. Once confronted with the impotent fragility of the precariat, who is actually stripped of his dignity and of the essential human rights, Gabe responsibly abandons his project of starting his own restaurant, not to feed the very monsters of abuse and exploitation that are invariably connected, as he slowly learns, with any business venture. So it criticizes any business venture because to launch a new project, you need to exploit. And therefore, he refuses to do that at the end of the novel. This newly acquired sense of solidarity is what makes the previously overlooked ethical encounter, to quote again Judith Butler, possible. Uh, this series of reflections and changes in the chef's mind is initially triggered by a seemingly inconsequential, unimportant episode, which marks the beginning of the novel. The death of a Ukrainian porter, Yuri, which accidentally occurs in the hotel basement where he secretly lives. So it starts like a crime story, but then it evolves in a completely different way. In her narrative, Monica Ali is at pains to depict the collective feelings of precariousness, insecurity, impermanence that characterize modern life, not just the life of the migrants, but our life in general. Um, she depicts the long-established cotton mills in northern England that for centuries had provided employment opportunities for nationals and newcomers alike, which are now rapidly closing down. And some of them are actually transformed into tourist attractions or short-lived shopping malls. Then she describes this impending fear of terrorist attacks, which before the pandemic was the staple element of the life of any British or even any Italian, because we were always expecting a terrorist attack at the Vatican. Now, the pandemic has changed our priorities and our fears also. And this causes, this fear of terrorist attacks causes people to become suspicious of whoever has a darker shade of skin or wears a large coat, because this coat may hide a bomb. Isolation is the only feeling that is paradoxically shared by people who dwell temporarily in impersonally furnished apartments, where anybody could be locked for a month or two, as the writer says, and nobody would even notice. And this is a very sad situation also in Italy. People are so indifferent to one another that there are many cases reported in the news when whole families die, and people just realize 2-3 months later, because there is no contact between neighbors. And the pandemic has increased this problem, because now we fear whoever is close to us, because he might bring contagion to us. The very hotel where most of the story is set is the emblematic icon of present-day transience. It is a contradictory space where dwelling and traveling overlap and conflate, where there is no clear-cut distinction between the public and the domestic sphere. So the hotel is still public, but is also personal, because you have your own room, your own space. Besides alluding to the time when it was first founded, the Victorian age, that's why it's called the Imperial Hotel, Its extravagantly pretentious name is indicative of the power relations that underline its functioning, thus serving as a symbol, as a objective correlative of the imperialism of global economy. And I'm quoting again Pen Chen Liao. The hotel kitchen is therefore equated by the author to, quote, a workhouse where mouth-watering delicacies are serially produced by underpaid and overworked labor for the greedy consumption of the upper class. An upper class that is feeding not just on the beautifully presented dishes, but also on the workers' exploited lives. There is a form of cannibalism running throughout the text, and I will tell you a little bit more about it. Gabe's kitchen staff is at first presented as a perfectly functioning body, as what the writer calls a, quote, United Nations task force, all bent to the works. Every corner of the earth is represented there, Hispanic, Asian, African, Baltic, and most places in between, end of quote. Nonetheless, Alice's metaphoric description, which misleadingly seems to suggest harmony and a form of collective idealism, tolerance, shared rights, she recalls the United Nation, clashes with the plot, whose climax is reached when the chef uncovers a double schemed designed by the hotel restaurant manager, Mr. Gleason, to further capitalize on the lives of freshly supplied workers. So behind this impeccable professionalism that he exhibits, his proper manners, his integrity, which is a feigned integrity actually, it tricks newly arrived maids and cleaners into prostitution. So there is a scheme within the scheme, while forcing informal workers to slave on his brother's farm in Norfolk after deviously confiscating their passports. So, accordingly, in the kitchen turns into the place where recipes of immorality are prepared. And the kitchen turns into a hellish cave where human flesh is selected, seasoned, because the new prostitutes have to dress in a particular way, glamorized, because he actually promises them that if they prostitute for a while, then they will be free and rich, only to be quickly devoured by cannibalistic customers. Even the highly commended sustainability of organic food production reveals its disquieting side when Gabe realizes that in the effort to suppress and contain costs without lowering the quality of products, only informal workers are hired in these organic farms. So non-documented migrants are exploited so that you can have your wonderful organic food at a decent price. Uh, Through the prejudiced comments of elderly characters, such as Gabe's maternal grandmother and his father, Monicali describes and denounces the typical scapegoating of immigrants. They are always called Pakis, regardless of their actual background. And they're held accountable for the growth of criminality and unemployment since they steal the jobs of British citizens. This is also the dominant narrative in Italy. That illegal immigrants steal the job of Italians. Pity that no Italian would accept to work for such a low wage and in such poor working conditions. All the same, Monicali's portrayal of the racialized other is much subtler and more complex than that. In truth, the position of every member of Gabe's pirate crew, the way it's called, coincides with what the Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben has defined homo sacer. So in ancient Roman law, a man who had crossed certain lines was banned from the community as stripped, deprived of all his or her rights. Consequently, his bare life, nuda vita, could be taken by anybody without legally committing any form of murder. So they were not existent. They did not exist according to the law. Even though it could not be sacrificed, satyr also means accursed. It's not only sacred. So immigrants who have crossed the borders of both geography and legality may be perceived as Agamben's homines sacri. They dwell in an ethical twilight zone where they're granted no protection, even if their very livelihood, their very existence is at stake. For the very reason that their existence is deemed less valuable, deficient. They are disposable. And I'm using again Judith Butler's theory. They're disposable lives. Uh, when Monicali describes these immigrants, they are downgraded to the rank of brutes. They're viewed as, quote, wild dogs or a pack of rats burrowing underground in the bowels of the Imperial Hotel. And also this reference to the bowel is interesting because it is as if the hotel had eaten, had feasted on their flesh. In addition, when depicted as human beings, they're almost divested of humanity. Before his fatal accident, Yuri, the Ukrainian porter who died at the beginning of the novel, used to live in the hotel basement, which Monica Ali calls the catacombs, an evocative epithet that recalls the concept of secrecy, persecution, martyrdom, and, of course, nuda vita. The catacombs were the places where the first Christians used to hide, because otherwise they would have been butchered by the Romans. The Ukrainians' puzzling death keeps haunting Gabe's dreams for the very reason that it is insignificant. Nobody cares about him. Um, those who are subjected to bonded labor are considered, as I mentioned before, disposable people. Their lives, and I'm quoting again Judith Butler, are not quite lives. They're cast as destructible and ungrievable. They are lose-able or can be forfeited precisely because they are framed as being already lost or forfeited. End of quote. There is another character, the character of Lena, a Belarus, this dishwasher, that after fleeing from her pimp, eventually finds sanctuary, finds shelter in Gabe's flat. She is another forgettable and seemingly inconsequential figure. She's described as fragile. Her frame is depicted as cadaverous, as if she were some kind of zombie. As one of the other characters describes her, she is so skinny, I'm quoting, that she would pass under doors. So thin, she is hard to see. So these are people who are actually unnoticed. They pass unnoticed for most of their lives. They're not existence for most of the people. They are ephemeral, invisible. Lena acts as if she were a ghost, caught in what already seems to be a posthumous life. And when Gabe first perceives her with his eyes, she's in the basement, which she shares with the Ukrainian porter, standing in the doorway in the jumble of shadow and light. Also, our first description is the description of a ghost. She's an apparition. She's suspended in a liminal position between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Uh, Her face, and I'm quoting from the text, was so thin and rigid, and her hands, which she held twisted together at her chest, were fleshless claws. And also, this reference to the claws is interesting because she's dehumanized, she's downgraded to the rank of an animal. At first, Gabe behaves just like the last of her exploiters. He's not really interested in her past. He doesn't want to listen to her. He does not ask too many questions. And despite the occasional guilty feelings, he trades his protection for sex, loveless sex, obviously. In one of his dreams, he himself seems to transform into a cannibal. So he describes this cannibalistic ritual of possession. In his dream, he kisses Lena so hard that there is blood covering her face, as if he was eating her. The control he manages to exercise over her life is such that the girl is almost a prisoner in his apartment. She cannot go out. She has to ask for permission for whatever she does. And when he describes her, it does not perceive her as a whole human being, but as an assemblage of body parts that he, and I'm quoting from the text, would take pieces of her like a jigsaw puzzle and arrange them, every fragment. So she's not perceived as a whole. Lena's only defense against annihilation is her storytelling. She keeps telling story, even though Gabe doesn't want to listen to her. Keeping her painful memories alive to stir Gabe's reaction, to forcefully awaken his sense of responsibility. Lena does not just tell her own story of cruelty, rape, abuse, but also the story of her friends, of other people that she met, the prostitute from Moldova who turned to police for help, only to be questioned and repatriated because she was illegal, and met at the airport of her own mother country by the very people that she was striving to release herself from. So she goes back to prostitution again. Or she describes the story of the Romanian girl whose front teeth had been removed so that she could be better at having oral sex. So she describes these really gruesome, cruel, terrible stories that at first Gabe doesn't want to listen to, but at the end is forced to listen to, so that he becomes aware of what goes on behind the perfect surface. Now, the main storyline of In the Kitchen is actually punctuated with a lot of digressions, which correspond to the individual narratives of the various migrants. There is Kano, who is a child soldier. There is another one who is a doctor who had been threatened because he had discovered that the radioactive waste that was poured into a river was actually causing newborn babies to be deformed, and therefore he had been forced to live because his life had been threatened. So Monicali's efforts to emphasize the humanity, the dignity of and the worth of either invisible or demonized or dehumanized immigrants, especially if illegal, are coupled with their intention to offer insights into the inner workings of neoliberal policies and practices. This is another important point. Gabe, at the end, refuses, as I said, to open his restaurant because he becomes aware of the mechanisms underlying present day economy, which are actually blatantly exposed by Mr. Fairweather, one of his mentors. And I quote, bonded labor, form of slavery for the 21st century, taking away passports, debt bondage, threats of violence, that sort of thing. And this man reassures Gabe that nobody would care and nobody's going to notice or mind, provided that the prices remain low. Nonetheless, sorry, that's my telephone. Sorry about that. Nonetheless, when basically he swaps role with the illegal workers because he himself ends up working for a farm in Norfolk, then he really understands because he steps into the shoes of the undocumented migrants because it's mistaken for one of them. And therefore, he decides to change completely his point of view. By sharing animal sheds for shelter, by facing the same toil and hardships, by standing up for common rights when trampled upon, Gabe manages to form solid bonds of solidarity with his fellow creatures, thus fulfilling Judith Butler's vision of a sustainably and sustainable independency on egalitarian terms among human beings, which is actually what the main character eventually discovers. Let's move now to the second novel, Sanjeev Sahot's novel. Talking about him, he has a background, a Punjab background. His Punjabi family settled in Derbyshire, and he acquired a degree in mathematics, and therefore he moved to Sheffield, and he started a parallel career as a writer because he was not born as a writer, he was born as a mathematician in actual fact. And The Year of the Runaways, 2015, received a nomination for the Dylan Thomas Prize and won the Encore and South Bank Sky Arts Awards. So the ethics of literature in Sanjeev Sahot's opinion is really interesting and has been explored by him in his interviews. As he states, and I'm quoting from a recent interview, the media and government want a simple narrative. I was talking beforehand of oversimplifications that comes with easy hooks and gets easy catchwords and slogans out there, which will make people think that they are on top of the situation while they are not. In his opinion, novels still play an important role today because they hold a mirror up to society and they show facets of life that society might otherwise not be able to see. And this is also taken from another interview. And he also gives a huge responsibility to the reader. So he believes that the writer does half of the job and the reader does the other half of the job. So the reader is always active. Now, the story is mostly set in Sheffield and in India in 2003. And The Year of the Runaways focused on four protagonists, Tochi, who is a chamar, a Dalit subcommunity, who arrives illegally in England after the slaughter of his family by a group of Hindu nationalists, after who emigrated with a student visa he paid for to actually support his family with the proceeds of his casual jobs, and Randeep, Avtar's friend, who comes from a wealthy but disgraced family and enters into a scam marriage with Narinder, a British national with a Punjabi background, to be entitled to settle in the UK thanks to a marriage visa. So you see all these characters arrive in unexpected ways to England. Now, in this novel, the expected binary oppositions between us and them, here and there, tradition and modernity, are replaced by general feelings of uprootedness, precariousness, isolation, and with the notion of restless mobility that acquires a global dimension. The routes followed by immigrants, especially illegal immigrants, are rarely linear and straightforward. Tochi, for example, travels to Ashgabat, then to Turkey, then to Italy, then to France, in order to arrive to England, where he does not plan to stay, because he later on leaves and goes to Spain, and then at the end of the novel he goes back to India. So there is this constant mobility. Secondly, in the Year of the Runaways, the land of origin is not idealized, nor do migrants ever really suffer from homesickness, because violence and crime is everywhere, is a condition shared everywhere. India is often portrayed as a ruthless and crooked country where anything can be sold to the highest bidder, including visas and job opportunities, where Tochi will never be released of the stigma of being a chamar, and where fair treatment and wealth are intimately related concepts. So there is no nostalgia, the typical nostalgia of the novel of immigration. There's nothing like that, just cruelty. Sahota's characters, therefore, are not stuck in imaginary homelands, and yet their identity is not firmly located in any one place. Given the precarity of their work lives, they lack what sociologists define occupational identity. The occupational identity gives us a sense of also living in a community, and also a sense of purpose to our life. Even though the immigrants share the same flat, they are crammed all together in the same flat, their closeness is only skin deep. In truth, in their daily struggle to survive, they're lonely, watchful, and wary of one another, since their savings might be stolen and each of them might turn into a competitor for the daily wage, because they compete with one another for finding a job. Now, equated to either production machines or beasts of burden, even the immigrants' sense of time and space, which are supposedly fixed categories, is profoundly altered. As the title of the novel seems to suggest, the Year of the Runaways is simply different in the way it is perceived and articulated. The succession of seasons would pass almost unnoticed were it not for the unbearable cold of the British winter, and the only time of the year they absolutely focus their attention on is the so-called raid season, when the police checks intensify. So they have different agendas if compared to the lives of ordinary people. Being margisans, they have no right to go to hospital, and one of them, after, for example, has a serious infection in the novel, which cannot be treated legally, and he has to resort to an underworld doctor who naturally demands to be paid. So, as one of the characters in the kitchen explains, there is more truth in fiction than in fact. So I'm trying to wrap it up because I see that time is up. I started off by focusing, by highlighting the importance of literature, because it actually restores the humanity of what the news and newspaper articles simply portray as figures and sterile data. Okay, so I would like to conclude my talk by going back to where it started from, the work of literature, the responsibility of literature, the relevance of literature today. In an age of populisms, post-truth, and alternative facts, books such as Monica Alice and Sanjeev Sahota's are entrusted with a tremendous responsibility. They succeed in restoring a clear and powerful voice to the silenced ones, while treating the disease that is still affecting many of us and is still widespread. And this disease is called indifference. Thank you so much. I don't know whether there are questions, comments.
Dear participants, if you can type your questions in the comment section for the question answer session if you have. We are waiting for the questions from your side, dear participants. Continue. Okay, thank you, Professor Marino. We are grateful to you for sparing your valuable time for us and gracing this function. It was a thought provoking and insightful lecture. Now, I would like to invite my colleague, Dr. Wahaj Mohsin, to give a vote of thanks to our esteemed guest and the participants. Over to you, sir. Please.
Thank you, Dr. Aareena. As this session heads towards culmination, I, Professor Raj Mohsen, extend gratitude for today's speaker, Professor Elisabetta Marino, Department of English Literature, University of Vergata. Ma'am, your lecture on today's topic, non-documented migrants in contemporary British literature, has indeed been an enlightening one. Dear Professor, I would like to congratulate Dear Professor, I would like to congratulate you on behalf of the Department of Languages, Integral University, for sharing your knowledge with us and for inspiring the young minds with such insightful knowledge. Ma'am, you have opened the corridors of knowledge that will surely be traversed by our participants in future. You have covered such a vast spectrum of the literary corpus of Monica Ali and Sanjeev Suhuta. I would also like to express gratitude to Honorable Chancellor, Professor S.W. Akhtar, for providing us this rostrum for achieving academic excellence. My sincere appreciation for the efforts of Pro-Chancellor Dr. Syed Nadeem Akhtar and Vice-Chancellor Professor Javed Masarat sir for initiating the online International Faculty Development Program for the holistic development of our teaching fraternity. I thank Dr. H.M.R.F. Nadvi sir, Head Department of Languages, for encouraging us and supporting us in organizing such interesting sessions. I also extend gratitude to Dr. Aareena and Ms. Vanya for successful coordination and organization of this FDP. Dear Professor Marino, we hope that you will bestow upon our teachers and researchers the treasures of your knowledge in future as well. In the end, I would like to thank the entire teaching fraternity of the Department of Languages, the supporting staff, the logistic help, and all those who have patiently attended this session. Your participation is highly appreciated. It has been a delightful morning, and ma'am, you have given voice to the voiceless migrants. You are a true ambassador of the migrants. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for being the part of us, and thank you for your admiring vote of thanks. Dear participant, you all are showing great enthusiasm in participation and showing patience in receiving information from time to time. In our coming lectures, we have more eminent professors to fill the treasure of your knowledge. You have been added through our learning management system, Integral Learning Initiative ILI. Today we shall post assignment and quiz. It is mandatory for all participants to attempt within the time frame, and from time to time you receive some assignment through it. That would be mandatory for you all to submit for the successful accomplishment of this program. If you are not ready, do WhatsApp in the group. Dear participants, you have been a continuous source of inspiration for us. Keep inspiring us, keep connecting us. And for tomorrow's session, you would be informed through WhatsApp. Keep watching us. Have a wonderful day.